From your highest performing properties, would you be able to share typically what kind of revenue they generate?
For October alone, one of our biggest properties is bringing in 15k gross just for 1 month.
So today's guest is Joe Davies, the director of Host So Simple, an Airbnb management company in Liverpool that have over 100 properties. So welcome, Joe, to the podcast. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So actually, when I first started doing Airbnb about 3 years ago, the first management company that I came across was actually you guys. I think I saw an article in the Echo, in the newspaper, the Echo, about you.
Yes.
And I was really blown away by how professional your operation was, and how well your properties were designed as well. So please tell us a little bit about how you started and then how you grew to 100 units.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, firstly, thank you very much for the kind words. I think that Echo article has got us quite a lot of traction in the past and definitely helped our SEO anyway. But yeah, a bit about us. So we started Host So Simple 2016. So yeah, 6 or 7 years ago now. And it was, as a lot of businesses are, by accident. It was when Airbnb was still pretty new to the majority of the world. I think when I explained what I did, my first question was, have you heard of Airbnb? And it was usually a 50-50 yes and no, whereas now it's probably 90-10, depending on the demographic you're speaking to. And essentially my now wife, Katy, she was looking after one Airbnb for a family friend. And she was, like a lot of Airbnb hosts still are today, only using someone they know through their network. And it's like, I'm staying in an Airbnb as we speak right now, and the person running this is the owner's friend's neighbor. And that's the type of loose connection a lot of people have to rely on to find someone in an area where there isn't an agency like us or like some others around who you can go to and trust. And essentially Katy was filling that role for someone else, making a lot of money for the host and being paid a fixed changeover fee, or a fixed monthly amount, which was tiny in comparison to the income the owner was making. So fast forward a few weeks and months, we launched a website as the neighbor of the original Airbnb. That's just what we managed theirs as well. And I was thinking, wow, this really has got a demand if the neighbors are asking us. I thought it was going to be our first neighbor complaint, and how surprised I was to find that it was actually our second client. So yeah, and they're both still clients of our business today, like 6-7 years on. So it was an amazing start. And over time we grew. I created the website myself, which was made through Wix. Still haven't paid a web developer or web agency, still self-made.
Yeah, that's one thing I noticed. I really like the design and style of your website when I first checked you out.
Yeah, and it's just a shop window. It has no
Yeah.
functionality. It doesn't have fancy booking system behind it or anything like that. It literally is a shop window into who we are, what we do. And I think initially it was a lot of people trying to seem like they were bigger. It was a lot of stock images and New York apartments and things like that for maybe like a management agency in a small town in Liverpool or around Liverpool. So I thought, let's just be as vulnerable and honest as possible. Stick a picture of who we are up. Let's not pretend to be the big guys who've got offices in London and offices in Paris and all these places, and just be little old us in Liverpool. And that's how we positioned our business from the very beginning. We haven't tried to be bigger than we are. We've tried to just own our patch. We don't even manage outside, or we hadn't in the past, the city centre. It was city centre only and 2-bed properties and above. And that was been our niche that we've honed in on and really tried to own on the higher end of the market. But to go back to your question, yeah, we started it by accident through that, and it grew organically while I was still studying in university. I did business management with a year in industry as my degree. And the year in industry taught me I didn't want to work in a graduate job. Despite how nice that was, it wasn't for me. And I came back with a point to prove and an idea that I wanted to try and find. And luckily, good timing that Katy was looking after that Airbnb at the time. So we finished university together with 9 clients, and we grew organically and slowly from there with, again, no marketing push other than word of mouth and our
Really?
single website.
Well, yeah, that just really is testament to how well you guys are operating the properties if you've managed to grow to that size just through word of mouth. So
I mean, obviously
amazing.
the website has served us, but the website isn't a fancy website. It's just a Wix website with a SEO wizard that I did myself. So we've had no external like fancy plugins or anything like that. I always say good service sells, and that's what we've relied upon.
And how long has it taken then to go from your first property to over 100?
Yeah, so actually, good question. The real answer to that was about 4 years. We went to about 120, and we actually are only 115 now, which in theory sounds like a backward step, but the quality of that 120 at the start was quite varied, shall we say. I think we fell into the trap that many business owners fall into at the beginning, which is any client is a good client. You want to please everyone, you want everyone to like you, and if anyone reaches out, you want to make sure that you can help and deliver 10 out of 10 service. And I think a bit of maturity came in probably around COVID time when we looked at our portfolio and thought it's the classic 80-20 rule. 80% of your problems come from 20% of your properties, and also your clients as well. And we used that period to really review how we're operating. And I sort of did a few forecasts to say if we had much more of these type of properties and less of these properties, what would our profit margin look like? How many staff would we need? How many maintenance issues would we encounter? And we intentionally culled some of our portfolio. And I know it's a bit of a crude way to put it, but we essentially gave clients an ultimatum to say, look, this isn't up to the standard that we would expect when staying elsewhere, so we shouldn't really be managing it ourselves. So we didn't say, look, we're not interested. We just said, this is the amount of money you need to spend to bring it up to standard. Whether you do it yourself, whether you use us, whether you just need to get to that starting line, which we believe is a good quality service and offering. And then inevitably, some people couldn't afford to put the money in, which was fair enough. And we said, come back to us in the future if you ever can. And we then slimmed our portfolio down to about 60 odd, which was quite a scary move to do. But then we were really strict with the properties we took on. And over time now we've got a much stronger portfolio, much larger properties, all in a closer area, and it's much easier to manage. So we've got the same number of properties from an external perspective, which I guess is one of the metrics that agencies are judged on, but internally, the revenue we can generate with the portfolio today in comparison to the headaches, shall we say, of managing a portfolio of that size are worlds apart.
Yeah. So would you say that the deciding factor on whether you were going to keep the property or not was the kind of condition of it, whether it was how good the furniture was and the sort of structure of the property? Is that the main thing that was decided?
Yeah, or could be. I think it's the question, because some people might turn up with an amazing property and your eyes light up from the moment they send the photos or you go and view it. Some people have turned up with an absolute wreck of a place, but with a vision and with a budget that they know how it should look and how it should be.
Okay. Yeah.
And sometimes they're even better because you can now mold that property into exactly what the market wants and needs, rather than trying to fit what they thought was the best way to furnish it. So quality is something that we probably were a bit too lax on in the early days, but right now the market is so competitive that if you aren't offering a decent quality product from the beginning, you're almost set up to fail. You've got to offer even better service. You've got to be even cheaper and compete on other things if quality is not there from the beginning. So giving yourself a platform to succeed from the start. And it's not just from a selfish point of view, the clients as well, they want to get these numbers and figures that they've seen quoted elsewhere. And you've got to get quality right from the beginning. Yeah.
Great. So for anybody who's looking to get started in service accommodation but isn't sure whether it will pay off financially, based on your experience of the Liverpool market, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I think it's a cliched answer, but especially these days, to do your due diligence. I think back in 2016, when I started, you could sling any apartment up that had 4 walls and a ceiling, and you would get bookings. And today's market is a lot more competitive than that. So it doesn't mean that there isn't opportunities. It doesn't mean that the market's too saturated. It doesn't mean that you can't start now by any means. It just means that you need to be a lot more sure on what your USP is and what your service offering is. I think the clue is in serviced accommodation, the name, like it's the service you offer, and it's not just, listing something on Airbnb or booking.com and expecting the bookings to roll in. You have to really hone in on, from the start to finish, when your guest looks at your property, the listing title, the description, the information you give them from the moment they inquire or book, the booking confirmation message that they get back, the touch points they have with your brand, like all these things matter. And maybe if you're an individual investor or operator with one or two properties, you probably can bumble along. But I'd say from someone who's started at those numbers and scale to really think about it at the beginning, it's much easier to scale when you have a clear vision and identity of how your properties are going to stand out than to try and mold that along the way as the plan. And don't get me wrong, you will always change it as you go along and as you learn and grow and evolve, but not to just put that to, oh, that's what you do when you're a bit bigger. Like it's more important than ever to nail your strategy at the beginning. And I'd also say the flip side, which is probably the more negative thing, is that the margins between serviced accommodation and AST rentals now are a lot narrower. So don't just expect and assume all the time. There's certain properties where we will say to the client, look, we think we'll just about beat an AST rental on net income, but it's our recommendation not to go down this route because just about is not good enough for the risk that you're taking on and the extra headache almost of furnishing it and things like that. There has to be enough fat in between the two strategies to justify the inevitable risk that you're going to have a slower start and gain a reputation and the hockey stick curve of, as you get going. So always don't have too much pride to think that the first property you see is definitely the right one and that maybe someone else is on Airbnb, but they have different circumstances. They might not have a mortgage. They might not need to be repaid back in as many years as you do from your investments. Like it's not all about the property itself. It's a combination of the property and your individual circumstances. Not to be blinded by what everyone else is doing.
Great. So and if from your highest performing properties, would you be able to sort of share typically what kind of revenue they generate? And then what sort of profit that leaves to the owner, just so that people can get an idea that, if you get everything in line and sort of run it to the its full potential, that this is what you can expect to achieve.
Yeah, sure. And I think it's important to put a caveat in there to say that the best performing properties might, from a management perspective, so what I do is not always the best performing property from a landlord's perspective.
Okay. Yeah.
So when you giving advice to someone starting a management agency or managing other people's properties, perhaps selfishly, you're exclusively bothered about the top line revenue. Your management commission comes off the top line revenue, whether your client has a mortgage or not, whether he's on a 5-year fix that he fixed before the interest rates went mad or not, is irrelevant to you. It's always about what is the top line revenue. So top line revenue it is bigger in bigger properties. It's more higher end properties. So the large high end properties generate the most income for you, and they typically don't cost much more to manage because you're still managing one lead booker, one set of access instructions, one line of communication. Of course, the cleaning fee is bigger, but that's covered by the increased costs that you charge out. But in terms of management, if you could assemble a portfolio of large high-end properties, ultimately, that's what I was talking about before, your margin is a lot higher as a management agent. Talking from a landlord's perspective, of course, if you've got a large high-end property, i.e. an 8-bedroom house in the Georgian Quarter or somewhere like that, you're going to have large costs associated with purchasing it, financing it, and your council tax, your upkeep, your maintenance. So it might not be the most profitable business or property in our portfolio from a client's perspective. But I'll give two answers in terms of that. So our main one, I actually looked at this the other day. For October alone, one of our biggest properties is bringing in 15k gross just for 1 month, which is amazing considering.
Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah,
considering it's not hugely special. It's just big. And what I say to a lot of clients is that you've got like mini markets in each bedroom category, and supply and demand plays a huge role. If you're looking for an 8-bedroom house in the city centre, furnished to a high standard, and you're quite price inelastic, in an example, you're looking for a hen do and you're splitting it across 16 people, etc. Providing it's in the right area and the landlord has the necessary permissions and things like that to operate it, there's not many available in that area, so you're quite limited in what you can do. So as a host, you can push that price up far more relatively to the purchase price because of that mini market of supply and demand. So for us, we've generated probably about it's definitely 100k plus. I probably couldn't put a number on off the top of my head, but annual revenue from that house, and that is just furnished in the same way as a 2-bed flat is, with another 6 bedrooms added on. It's not that much different.
So that sleeps 16, does it?
Yes. We don't put sofa beds in that one. It's the only property we have in our entire portfolio without sofa beds.
And is that a city centre place?
It is, yes. It's in the Georgian Quarter, but in where all bars and restaurants are, and it's a very lively street. So lots of other like-minded properties are around there.
Yeah. Okay. And you don't put sofa beds. Is that just because you feel like you've already kind of reached the optimal number of guests in there?
Yeah, and it's the service as well. So when you get that many people, ultimately people get up at different times, and you don't want to be the guys on the sofa bed in the living room when everyone else is standing there looking at the watch thinking, what time are you getting up? And I think looking back to that service level, we could pack more people in. We probably could push the average nightly rate up by packing more people in, but the reviews and the experience that people have in that property will be impacted by that. And I think it's big enough to capture most of the large group market, and it ultimately doesn't need sofa beds to push it up too much. From my perspective as well,
it's not worth it, maybe.
And from my perspective as well, the larger the property, the more rowdy the groups can be sometimes in terms of occasions and stuff, and sofa beds aren't built for those type of occasions. So you need to make sure that you use them selectively with the type of clientele.
We often have to replace our sofa beds fairly quickly, or get our maintenance team to constantly reinforce them.
It's the worst thing to break, because it's a bed and it's needed now, and if it's broken in between guests, then you're left in terrible position where someone's paid to come and stay in your property and you can't offer the basic of a bed. So I probably am a bit of a sofa bed nerd, it's sad to say. I can tell you all of the IKEA models, I can tell you all of the different ones, but we've eventually found a manufacturer from Poland who builds brutal sofa beds that you just can't break, and ultimately, perhaps more importantly, are super comfortable. And if you woke up on one looking at the ceiling, you would have no idea you were on a sofa bed, which is really good and worth the extra investment.
Okay. I'll have to ask you after this call to send me the details of that person. Sounds great.
Definitely.
I mean, so speaking of parties, how do you kind of deal with those situations, and have you had any horror stories around sort of big groups and parties breaking out in your apartments?
So obviously it's a common concern about our industry, and rightfully so. I think ultimately you have a responsibility as a host to be aware of this and to be super mindful about how you're operating in light that this world exists. I can count on one hand the amount of serious issues we've had where we've had to evict guests in over probably 20,000 plus bookings now. And that's not luck, that's not by accident, that's by using the tools available to us to try and weed these guys out. I think it's always going to be a problem, and no one can sit here and say, I don't have these types of guests, as ultimately, without holding a hand into the property and sitting in there with them, you have to trust your guests to a certain degree. And as human beings, sometimes people get carried away. And I think for us, the tools that we use to try and reduce the problems we have is, firstly, how you handle inquiries. Every single guest who stays with us, whether it's Airbnb, Booking.com, TripAdvisor, HomeAway, or VRBO as it's called these days, and any channel, we have to ask, what is the purpose for their stay? What is the age range, and what are the plans while they're here? That's not to be nosy. That's not to judge them. That's purely to see how they respond as a guest. Some guests completely can read between the lines and say, I need to you're basically interviewing me here to say, am I a trusted person? And they'll give a nice comprehensive response and even understand what we're getting at and say, we'll have no problems from us. We're here for a birthday, but we're not a loud bunch, and we be respectful of properties at all times, blah, blah, blah. And that's stage one, just to understand. Some people won't respond and we have to chase. And then eventually from a phone call, we realize maybe they're not the guest for us from how they've dealt with that situation. Some people will outright tell us we're coming for an 18th birthday party. Great, that's good to know, because that's not suitable in our properties as per our house rules. And the second thing to do is offer them the chance. We're not doing it to catch them out, to say we have a huge selection of properties that are suitable for all types of occasions. So if this isn't suitable for why you're coming, we can relocate you to one that is, or put you in the right direction of someone else who hosts in that regard. So we've had plenty of occasions where we don't want people coming to Liverpool to have a great time, to come and celebrate, to be looking over the shoulder all the time, pretending that they're coming to play board games and have cups of coffee. Like we know that a big pull of Liverpool is the nightlife scene, and there's plenty of apartments that we manage which are more than suitable for that type of situation and area. So guests like the fact that they have the option to be relocated almost, and it's not that we're trying to catch them out. So people are a lot more honest when we approach it in that way. And then once they book and we're happy with that answer, we then, through Airbnb, we tend to keep it as is because we've got reviews. So if we can see reviews, we wouldn't go down this route. But if they don't have reviews, we send what we call our portal link. So I won't get too boring with the tech of this, but essentially it's an API plugin that we've had built by a developer or freelancer. Cost me no more than £500, and it plugs into our PMS software, which is Guesty. Probably would have been a question. And Guesty is great in a lot of ways, but limited in some. So this plugs into the back end of Guesty, and essentially it asks guests to does a walkthrough of, can you confirm you read our house rules? It asks them to individually tick each house rule so that they can say they've read it. Do an e-signature on the bottom saying, I understand I'll be evicted without warning if I break any of these and could be charged a full deposit. We then take a copy of their ID and a deposit as well for a credit card, separate from the channel, which we put in our house rules. Is that something that we take and is fully permitted within all channels? And then they then get verified and they don't receive any check-in instructions until they've gone through that portal link. And essentially it's letting them know, if you're going to cause any problems at a party, this is not the place to do it. And that we are well set up to deal with these type of issues. So we have a lot of people who, once they get the portal link, will cancel the booking. And for me, that's not a loss. That's a part of the industry that we need to play our role in and to be responsible with how we host. And that's how we have had much better luck with our vetting than maybe others have had. And I think the last thing to say is noise sensors. Noise sensors can be seen as a bit of a fad, but they are amazing for us. We have a dashboard with all of our properties showing us when they breach the acceptable threshold for that time of day. And I've made a few of these calls personally in my time, and most of the time it's people saying, oh, sorry, I didn't realize we were watching the telly, we had the music on, or we were playing a game and we've all got a bit excited, apologies. And I can see on a line graph the noise dive pretty much within 5 minutes and stay low for the rest of the night. And that intervention lets them know someone knows and is watching, not in a creepy Big Brother style way. We can't listen to what they're saying, we can't listen to the conversations. It's purely the decibels, but it also helps us manage our portfolio and reach out before maybe a neighbor has to reach out, which is the ultimate failure if a guest has stayed and disturbed neighbors. So there's plenty of tools we use to try and keep that record.
Right. Is that do you use minutes for your noise monitoring?
We actually use Noise Aware, but we are looking to move to minutes because it offers more features now. So we are looking to move to that, but Noise Aware does the job. it works, but we're always looking to improve our tech, and yeah, that's on our pipeline.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw Minute of introduced kind of tobacco smoke monitoring.
Yes, yeah.
As one of the. I don't know if that's kind of been brought into their products or whether they're just doing marketing to let people know it's coming.
Yeah, but it's a great idea.
Yeah, that's
It's
great.
a really good idea, and it's something the industry needs. And I'm constantly blown away by when I speak to people just in general day-to-day life, and they think my business is niche Airbnb management. I say, wait until you see some of the businesses within our industry, like who have piggybacked on this
Absolutely.
entire world, and that's
Absolutely.
a great example.
Yeah, for sure. Just on the software you've got that connects with your channel manager, Guesty, for doing the guest verification, does that also allow you to take deposits?
Yeah,
from the guest. Yeah, okay. And
yeah.
and do you find that when someone's booked on Airbnb, typically they tend to be almost reluctant to pay deposits? Have you come across that?
Yeah, it can be. And again, it's the clientele. An experienced Airbnb guest might be like that. And ultimately, that's not what they're used to. And I totally appreciate that. And I always say, if we ever get any hesitancy, it's to reach out with a phone call. Ultimately, it's an extra layer of protection for us. And it's, if you're not intended to cause any damage or cause any problems, as long as you trust us as a host, i.e., you can see that we're decent, reasonable people who aren't looking to make an extra revenue stream from a deposit, which some hosts unfortunately do fall into that category, then there shouldn't be a problem. But I always say to our team, use discretion. If you can see someone got 17 reviews, an experienced Airbnb guest, and they've got a problem with paying an extra deposit, then maybe in that individual instance, we can take a view on that and know that maybe they've got some currency and trust as well that we need to be aware of, and not just to think everyone has to abide by our rules. I think it's important to have processes in place, but also important to flex those depending on the circumstances. And if it's a person with no reviews, no previous history, and they're not willing to pay the deposits, then we're not willing to take that risk either. So it's an inevitable situation where we say, well, maybe find someone else to stay with.
Yeah, makes sense. Although it sounds like you guys run your properties very well, I don't think there's any Airbnb host out there who hasn't got any horror stories to share from their guests. So what would you say is kind of the horror story that sticks out in your mind the most?
I think the worst one for us, and I mean this is warts and all, I'm giving everyone everything, because this is the type of thing that ends up, in the news, and people get really worried about it. And as I said, we've had, I'm estimating how many bookings we've had. We've had 13,000 reviews in Airbnb. Not every guest leaves a review, so probably more than double on booking.com. So if we're talking around 30,000 bookings, this is the one type of thing that probably would end up in the Daily Mail type situation. But it was when we had, and it was a party flat again, and it was ultimately guests who were a local guest, so they were from the city we live in, which is Liverpool. And I'm super proud of my city. Always lived here, went to university here. I love my city, and I'm a massive ambassador for it. But it's a worldwide issue in our industry that local bookings can cause more problems, because ultimately extra guests who perhaps weren't on the original booking may come back, and it's easier to invite more friends and people, and it just, for someone like us who were trying to run a professional operation where we have proper insurance in place, proper vetting, proper checking procedure, accepting last minute local bookings for party type properties carries more risk for us. And I think we learned that the hard way when we went into a property the next day, and I think every flat piece of furniture, that any horizontal piece of material had a beer bottle on. And I think it gotten out of hand. And when I called the guest said, we went home as the lead booker felt sick, whose birthday it was, and we passed the keys to somebody else. And I think that's when you go, wow, this is how vulnerable we can be. And I think we would have caught that with noise sensors. And I know party flats can have music on, but that was probably way out of hand. And one of the features that I think Minus has as well is the number of devices in the property. So we've never had anything like that again, and we've made it very clear to guests that they are responsible ultimately as the lead booker. So we actually got a lot of funds back from that lead booker who ultimately didn't cause any of that damage because she was ultimately responsible for what happened. So that's the worst thing that happened. And that was in the first 2 years of starting. But I'm constantly saying to our team, if we expect to go through life not encountering any problems, then we're going to be quite surprised. But what we can do is adjust how we operate, adjust our processes, constantly evolve and learn and become better hosts for it. And we've never had an issue like that again because we warn every single guest just how important it is and how much responsibility and ultimately risk they inherit if they are not to inform us if extra guests come back. So not quite the worst story, but ultimately you need to know who's in your property at all times, and you have a responsibility to your clients to manage it in that way. So that was a big learning curve for us.
So we touched on it a couple of minutes ago, but using software to run a service accommodation business is it's become pretty much essential just to ensure the smooth running and efficiency of the whole process. So other than Guesty for your channel manager, Noise Aware for your noise monitoring system, what other software tools do you currently use?
Yeah, sure. So before I answer that, I'd say just generally software is something that you should be prioritizing from day one in every way, shape and form. Do not think I will use software when I get big enough or I don't need that yet. You should have the same tech stack now as you do when you're at 100 units if you're planning to scale to that size, not trying to fill in backwards, if that makes sense, as software is so powerful and the cost benefit of it is massive when it's used properly. And I think one of the mistakes we made, and I see others making, is saying, oh, I'm going to do this for now and then I'm going to move software when I get bigger. And the headache of the actual change is not being considered. Changing PMS system is an absolute nightmare, even at 3 or 4 properties. When you're at 40, 50 or larger, it's a much bigger task. So you should be looking at what you can scale with, providing that meets your business goals and your personal goals that you want to scale. But yeah, software generally. So we use Guesty, as I say, PMS, which I think is the best in the industry. It's one of the most expensive, but also the best. And hence I'm such a big believer in software. It shouldn't be something that we're trying to save money on too much. So Guesty, as you said, Noise Aware. Then we use Price Labs as our pricing tool. We've trialed Beyond. I know Wheelhouse is getting a lot of good recommendations as well, but Price Labs is very customizable, and I love the culture they have there. If I have a really serious problem or really tough question, I can ultimately speak to the founder within a day or two. And I love businesses that are really keen to impress and on the forefront of developing. So Price Labs heavily recommend. We also use Asana as our task management software, and Asana is not quite SA related, but I use it for my personal life now. Even my house to-do list of my chores is in Asana, and I live off it, and it's so powerful. And again, free up to a certain amount of users, and I wish I would started using that earlier. We use Breezeway for housekeeping tasks, so that's ensuring that. And I use Breezeway again. This is how I select software. I look at bigger guys than us and look at what they're using. For me to go and do my own check of everything and trial everything and see how it best works for our business, I'm still not the best person to do that as well, because I don't know what I don't know. I'm still learning on the job. And I think seeing businesses bigger than us, maybe 200, 300 units, whenever I'm at conference events, I'm always asking them, what do you use? What do you use for this? Because if they're operating it at scale larger than us, then 9 times out of 10, it's going to work for us too, providing we're set up in a similar way. So Breezeway allows us to clean and have our housekeepers clean in a way that we set it. We're not relying on the housekeepers' internal methods. So checklists, verification photos. We also manage our maintenance tasks through there. So housekeepers can raise maintenance tasks direct to the man on the ground. So there's no middleman needed. Trying to think what else we use. No, I think that's pretty much it. I'm trying to think. Noise Aware I've mentioned. We operate off Google Workspace, Google Docs, Live Docs. I think it's important to mention, and I know Google Docs is like, oh yeah, everyone uses that, just like Office, but actually we use it really, really well with SA. And one of the things that we do is that we give every single guest a Google Drive link, which is almost like a PDF which is essentially it contains the house manual, and it's an interactive PDF, so it's got videos on. It's essentially similar to these things like TouchStay, and I think Duve is one as well. But we've got complete ownership of how it's operated, and it's free. So for us, our check-in instructions as well, if you were to come and stay at one of our properties, you would click on your portal link, which will have in there your check-in instructions, your house manual, and your city guide, restaurant recommendations, things to do, etc. All in a nice graphically designed way, not done an amateur on Word. And in those check-in instructions, you would have a picture of the front door, a picture of the lift, a picture of the staircase that you need to take, arrows. It's very, very so detailed. It's almost foolproof to get a guest in from collecting those keys into the property, but they're not relying on just a little paragraph in an Airbnb message, because we all know how risky that can be, and how some guests, especially foreign guests in a new country, will need walking through all the minor steps, even how to use a fob. You think that's obvious. You scan a fob on a door and the door opens. A lot of foreign guests aren't used to that, so you have to point the arrow where the fob system is, circle the fob on the keys and say, place this fob on the door, etc. And it reduces the friction. And our check-in rating is something that we track as a KPI, and is consistently above 9 out of 10 across the board. And I think it's really important, as it sets the tone for the rest of the trip, how you check in.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I think so in terms of software, I also use Guesty, but Guesty for hosts. And I'm looking potentially maybe to switch to Guesty, because it has more features as I sort of scale from 11 properties upwards. I haven't heard of Breezeway, but so we currently use Turnover B&B, or now known as Turno. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I am. And again, I looked at that as one of the options. I had a demo with it. I think Breezeway, for me, again, it's used by the big companies, and the founder of Breezeway also founded Flipkey, which was eventually acquired by TripAdvisor, which is a big channel in our industry. And I think knowing the industry and being able to scale it to that size was really important for me, as well as the tech itself. So more than happy to let you have a play around with Breezeway. And I think another one is Properly as well. Properly's got quite a lot of users.
How about Keynest for key storage?
Yeah, we do use Keynest. Sorry, I should have pre-listed all the things we use, but Keynest is huge for us. Reduces the need for lockboxes. I don't like lockboxes, especially outside apartment blocks where you got loads of lockboxes on the wall. It's confusing. It doesn't look nice. And I think, again, it's one of the stains of our industry that we're putting lockboxes up left, right, and centre on beautiful buildings at times, which I always try to avoid. I think Keynest is also safer. We've got complete audit of the key trail of when the cleaner collected it, when the cleaner dropped it off, when the guest dropped it off. So if the cleaner wants to start earlier, we can see if the guest checked out without having to pop a van. So all sorts of benefits, and it's also more insurance friendly, which is a big thing for clients.
Right. So, and although not directly software related, but a lot of people are looking to use virtual assistants overseas in order to improve their efficiency of their business. Is that something that you guys do at the moment?
Yes, with great success. So when the world came to an end in March 2020, and everyone suddenly got pulled off their hamster wheel and thought, what are we going to do now? And I think for me, it was always in the back of my mind, but I was typical small business owner, spinning too many plates, barely surviving each day, just bumbling along. And there was no way I was going to carve out time to do this properly. And I think for me, and I see it a lot with other guys, that virtual assistants are great, but they're only as good as you're prepared for them. And they're not superhumans. They're not robots. They're still humans like you and me who need nurturing, and they need looking after. They need one-to-ones. They need proper management. And very often people wait until they're so stressed out with the work to bring in a virtual assistant, which is just a complete wrong environment to bring someone in. And put yourself in their shoes, logging onto a laptop on the other side of the world, expecting someone to hit the ground running from day one. So COVID for me allowed me to really, really scale back what our business was doing and how we could change it to operate for virtual assistants. And I'm going to plug someone here who I highly recommend, Steve Day, who runs the system for outsourcing. I don't know if you've heard of him. He was a GP in UK, and he actually systemized his UK buy-to-let portfolio so well with virtual assistants that he eventually quit his job as a GP and decided to help other SME owners prepare for virtual assistants. So he does a course where you essentially get one-to-one coaching on how to work with virtual assistants, how to set up your business, how to set up processes, and how to use Asana, all these different things. And then he actually gives you use of his VAs temporarily to get used to the relationship. And those VAs will give you feedback and say, you need to give me more direction here, or you need to be more clear in this element. So I almost got coached on how to use VAs before I hired my first VA, and they hold your hand to hire your first VA. So fast forward to 2023 now. So fast forward 3 years, I have 12 full-time VAs in my business.
Wow.
And they are amazing. And people think that I was one of these cynics who thought, oh, it's not going to be quite the same as the level of service that we had. And I think to sort of drop that naivety and just go in with open eyes. These people are very well qualified, and well educated people with a really strong work ethic, and the impact it's had on our business is mind blowing. I don't think we would be where we are today without them. And it's not just back of house guest services; it's bookkeeping, it's maintenance planning, it's onboarding assistance. Yeah. There's so much that they can do, and I think for us to hire less people and maybe all be UK based, we would have an inferior service for our clients, and that's the cold hard truth. There's only so much margin we've got to play with. So a lot of our clients are on first name terms with them. They fully bought into it as well, and I was trying to protect them from it and hide it, and thought, no, clients can't know we're using virtual assistants. But I think just to drop all of those misconceptions and to go in with completely transparent and be open with it, because they are amazing people and they've taught me so much in terms of work ethic. And I can highly recommend bringing in a VA as early as you can afford one, not waiting until you're so stressed out that you need one.
Yeah. And if somebody wants to bring in a VA, how would you recommend they do this? Is it through Steve Day, as you mentioned, or is there kind of any alternatives to bring in a VA?
Yeah, so for me, I'm always a big fan of utilizing someone else's experience, even if it's for a fee. I might save a bit of money now and bumble along and get there eventually, but to get there faster with the help of someone else and have the peace of mind that I'm doing what I'm supposed to do has always been my preference. And that's even in fitness, everything. I would much rather have a coach. And I think I don't want to say it's the only way. If you're a good person and a good manager and you manage your UK staff well and you transfer that to a Filipino VA or wherever they are in the world, you will still do well, but it's just slightly different in terms of managing online team. So to start with a VA, onlinejobs.ph is where majority of VAs in our business were recruited from. But it's even how you recruit, the questions you ask. You might have the best VA in the world, but their internet connection is so slow that they're constantly dropping out from phone calls or team meetings and stuff. So this is things that I'd never considered. So there's all sorts of different things that you have to check and evaluate, as well as the individual themselves, to make sure that they're a good fit for your business. But yeah, for me, Steve Day, Systems for Outsourcing is the business. He also has a podcast that he started now, and a lot of small business owners, these aren't big, huge multi-million-pound businesses, that small businesses who are just getting started in different industries, a lot of success stories from going through that route, and it's a very worthwhile investment.
Yeah, great. Is there any other tools or kind of bits of software that you think that would be crucial to help you run your business but don't currently exist?
Oh yeah, I'd say the world of finance needs a lot more padding out. So pulling data from your PMS and putting it into a nice, easy to understand statement for owners. I know this does exist in Guesty already, but there's a lot of limitations. I know Zivu is another PMS that has this, but ultimately there's still a lot more that we could do. having like an owner's login where they can literally see all the metrics of their portfolio, and you almost don't need to send them a statement because they can just log in and see it. A bit like we look at our utility bills, we log into the dashboard and download the PDF. But it's just in a much nicer, easier to digest format that gives them forward-looking forecast data based on last year. And we do this anyway with our clients. When we do a performance review, we get on a call with them, we show them the market data, we show them how they're performing against the market, we show them possible improvements they could make to their listing, and we also show them past performance and maybe how Q2's done this year compared to Q2 last year and the reasons why. But I feel like technology could do that for us to a certain extent, and then we could maybe be discussing the data that's been generated, whereas that's quite a manual process for us at the moment to pull that from Price Labs and Guesty and other places like AirDNA. But yeah, I think also AirDNA itself, I know your product has got a lot of links into AirDNA, but I think industry confidence in the data is still quite low. And I think having confidence in the data where it's across multiple channels, I know Booking.com is quite limited with what it wants to share, but for us as an industry to really excel and use data properly, we need a good, clean data source that is whole market, not just one side of the market. And I think that tool still doesn't quite exist, probably because of limitations with Booking.com. But I think also how they scrape the data. I mean, I'm not terribly informed, but there's a load of caveats. If a calendar's blocked for maintenance, it looks like a booking, and it can artificially inflate the figures. I think if we really, really got confidence that we could look at Airbnb listings and see exactly what the net amount they were making based on council tax, utility estimates, and it was really accurate source of data, I think that would be great as an industry.
Because Price Labs has a lot of data about that as well in terms of market analytics and future bookings and things. So do you look at Price Labs data at all, or
yes,
do you use that data, and do you use AirDNA, or do you find that they're not reliable enough yet for you to get any value from them?
Yeah, Price Labs primarily, but the market dashboards they use are great. And I think what we do, which again highlights the limitations, is Price Labs allows us to use a comp set, so a comparable set of data based on Airbnb channel, 2 bedrooms and above with 20 or more reviews. And that's a really good comp set to use because you're not competing with maybe the new ones that have just started, or the fake listings that are littering the industry now,
or ones that are not priced correctly, and
or ones that are intentionally priced too high because they don't want bookings and they haven't delisted it and clouding the data. So this one is like ones that are properly off the ground and moving. And when you look at the market occupancy of those properties against maybe the market occupancy of the channel as a whole, it's hugely different. A lot of data sources are using the whole channel as a data source, especially when you see news articles and journalists who probably aren't as glued up as ourselves on this industry. It's still not quite that level of nuance in the data, which would really help not just us, but investors and the wider industry.
Yeah, of course. And so with kind of the recent introduction of ChatGPT and other AI tools, there's a lot of talk in our industry about how AI can help people to run their service accommodation businesses more efficiently. So have you dabbled at all in AI, using AI? And if so, how?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and I think this is the buzzword of all the conferences this year. I've been to a few, and it's the new kid on the block. I think conferences can get quite repetitive when there's not much radical change, and I think this year it's just blew up. And how it can be used in our industry is all about automation and systemization, and this is like the next big thing. And how it integrates into our world is probably still not quite there yet, but we are partnering with an AI firm that plug into Guesty and essentially will use the custom fields. So I'm probably talking in Guesty chat a bit too much here, but essentially we can attach fields to properties. So for example, the key nest code, we could say bin location, and that would have the location of the bins and what we name the fields and what the answer is for a property. this AI tool can read it. So if a guest
see.
says, do you know what the code for the key nest is? The AI tool will know where to find that information and will automatically respond on our behalf in a conversational way. Obviously, it's got limitations and it's still early days, but I've seen it working in another account, and it's mind blowing how much it's going to reduce the need for, you know, your bog standard replies. Even, can you tell me where the nearest supermarket is to this listing? The AI tool can look at the listing address. It can go on Google Maps, look for the nearest supermarket and list them, like ChatGPT can do. If you ask ChatGPT, can you list the 3 closest supermarkets to this address? I'm pretty sure it could do that. And it's leveraging that technology within our world and our inbox, which is massively reducing the number of human hours needed to keep the messaging going and to be as efficient. It's a much faster response.
Right. All right, let's talk about regulation. So with the recent announcement from Michael Gove about short-term let properties requiring permissions in the future, you know, what do you think is going to be the sort of future for the service accommodation industry around regulation?
Yeah, it's another common question from our other conferences this year. And yeah, for me personally, I've long been an advocate of regulation, just less so limitation. I think our industry has a lot to catch up on in terms of health and safety, and there's still a big grey area, and a lot of people don't know what the rules are. There's people who want to follow the rules but don't know where to find where they are. We get conflicting information from the council as we do from the fire service, and even they openly say this is still a big grey area in our department. And I think for us to be able to publicly say this property meets all of these regulations and is permitted would be great. It's just it's not always possible right now in terms of we need regulation to come in to say these are the minimum requirements. I think speaking more specifically about limitation and the broader arguments of housing supply, I think we are an easy target for that ultimate failure of government to provide more homes, and that although we definitely play a minor part, it's not the fundamental reason why we are where we are as a country. But you have to look at the other side of the coin as well, and think there's a lot of value that we bring as an industry, especially in Liverpool and the economy that we have. We're hugely visitor based, and a lot of it's not just us as hosts. We are almost the gatekeepers for the guests coming in, but they're going to spend money in the coffee shops, the restaurants, the cafes, the bars, the nightclubs. All these places rely on us having these guests to come. And if we were to remove that element of our city, it would be a huge own goal for us and would massively affect our economy. So I think what we're seeing is professionalizing of the industry, where regulation is going to be tighter, the barriers to entry are going to be higher, and the places where we can operate are going to be more limited. And I think that was inevitable from day one. You cannot just let everyone do whatever they want, wherever they want, and not expect instances of antisocial behavior. I think what I mentioned before about vetting guests, there's plenty of people who naively don't realize the risk they're taking when they do list a property, and they might find a group of 8 people coming to stay in their 2-bed flat, and they're thinking everyone's going to be as nice and honest and friendly as they are, and then they're burnt badly, and the neighbours are kept up all night and things are damaged. And there's all sorts of instances like that where it's just naivety and or greed, where the host doesn't care because they think it's not my problem, I'm not there. And if we leave everyone to sort of be responsible without rules, the inevitable situation is that it's not always followed. So I think regulation is definitely needed, but I think it needs to be brought in properly. I think Scotland has had quite a bumpy start. I think most of the applications that have gone in haven't even been looked at. I think I don't know the actual percentage that have been approved, or it's just that they've got a huge backlog. They don't have the necessary manpower to sift through them. And similar to the Liverpool landlord licensing scheme, we love bringing in these schemes that look great on paper and solve all these issues in theory, but in the real world they need actually running and policing properly. And I'm a big fan of bringing in something that will do what it says it's going to do with the right capacity to be enforced. There's no point having rules that only, because what happens, similar to the landlord licensing scheme, the good hosts sign up, the good hosts pay the license fee, the good hosts meet all the requirements, and the bad hosts don't, and the wheel keeps spinning and nothing gets done. And then you're in an even worse position where people are pretending to have met requirements. And I think we need to be cautious about how we implement regulation, but it definitely is needed.
Yeah, I think I'm with you in that I don't think the real issue with the kind of the housing crisis and the cost of houses, the inflation in houses comes down to the short-term rental sector. I feel like, short-term rentals make up something like 3% of total homes in the UK. So it's not in my opinion, like what's driving that house price to go up, and the lack of availability of properties to rent. I do think in some areas of the UK where you have these hotspots, like Cornwall,
100%,
for example, where you could like bring in more of a kind of a localized approach to licensing, as opposed to doing a sort of blanket license across the country.
100%, and we're obviously biased to a certain extent, and I think it's important to state that. But at the same time, you can't have schools in Cornwall not having enough pupils. You can't have local corner shops closing down because in the winter no one uses them. Like, that is not the ultimate end goal of what we're trying to do here. Whereas if you compare Cornwall with Liverpool relies on this year-round tourism to generate huge amounts of income to a lot of people who live and work here. And we can't apply the same rules here as we can to Cornwall, who it's obvious to anybody that needs someone to step in and regulate that to limit it. Otherwise, it's going to be a city full of second homes for rich people who can afford them, and that's not what Cornwall should be. And it's a huge asset to our country. And I think we're trying to not get confused between the two issues and not paint the issue with the same brush.
And also on the topic of the future of service accommodation, do you think that the demand will still kind of remain high? Do you think it will increase, and how do you think that the supply will change as well over the next coming years?
So I think I mentioned the word saturation already on this podcast, and that gets bandied around a lot more commonly these days, and with reason. I think we're definitely more competitive these days, and if it was allowed to continue, take any market, it's basic economic theory that supply and demand will eventually level out. If people are making a lot of money through service accommodation and there's opportunity for someone else to come in and make money as well, then that will happen. And then eventually too many people will come in, not enough people will be making enough money from service accommodation, people will leave the market, and the market will rebalance again. I think we are going and approaching that at some point. So regulation is almost coming at a good time for the Liverpool market to a certain extent. But I always think it's important to outline, again, the almost mini markets within the broader market. And I think premium always sells. There's always people who want to stay in high-end properties. And if it means that we all need to get better at what we do, not just in product quality, but in service offering as well, and we need to keep knocking on the door of progression and professionalizing our industry to offer an almost hotel-like service with all the benefits of service accommodation to compete for those bookings, then it's only a positive thing for the end consumer. And we, as a result of us scaling back our portfolio and concentrating on the higher end ones, especially with the larger ones, again, like I said, that are in fewer supply, we're not quite being as caught up maybe as at the lower end of the market with your one beds and studios, which I think inevitably are gobbled up by the larger properties in midweek when the two beds drop their prices down to pretty much the cleaning fee plus an acceptable margin of profit for the risk inherited. They're coming down to the similar price to what a studio or one bed could be. And most people are booking the higher end, bigger properties because it's the same price. Whereas one beds have a floor that they cannot go below because it still needs to be cleaned. It still needs to be managed. It still needs to have utility costs. It still has a service charge if it's a flat. And I think it's a lot tighter at that end of the market now than it's ever been. And yeah, it means that we've got to really be picky with the properties that we're selecting to take on.
Makes sense. Okay, so in your journey to 100 properties, you mentioned about how some of the mistakes you made were taking on sort of any property without prioritizing the quality. What other mistakes would you say you made along the way, and what would you do differently if you could do it again?
Yeah, really good question. I think it's not just about the property, it's also about the client. The client has to understand what isn't required in this industry. If they've got an amazing property, but they expect to hit the ground running from day one and hit the high months immediately, you're always going to have a tussle between them. And I think from a selfish perspective of working with people you get on with and enjoy, you don't have to be everyone's best friend, but also some clients will have to expect a lot more from you in the initial days. You'll run around like a headless chicken and bend over backwards to please those, but it's not sustainable. And making sure you're selective with who you work with is a big thing. I mean, starting off, you sort of have to earn your stripes. You have to go through that learning curve almost, but eventually you have to have the self-respect to realize that you offer a good service, you charge a good price, and ultimately you run a good business. And that you're not going to please everyone, and not everyone's going to be as impressed or pleased to work with you as others. And I think that was quite a big ego hit for me when I was younger. I wanted everyone to love me and everyone to love House So Simple and everyone to have a perfect time. And that goes for guests as well. I think the absolute heartache when you get your first bad review and you're like, oh, I did so much for that person. I can't believe. But like, you have to become detached from it and think, right,
you can't please everyone.
Of course. And all you can do is look inwards and go, what can I do to drive action off that? If there's a bad review, that means you need to change something, then you need to change it. But if it's a bad review that you've done everything you can possible, and it was just ultimately they booked a city centre apartment and then didn't like the location, there's only so much you can do. And I think detaching yourself from the emotional side of it and purely looking at it as almost a game. What do I need to do as an action point off the back of this feedback, and making sure you're constantly nailing that side of things and getting less involved in the emotional side of things. Hiring as well, making sure you hire properly. I, as a typical business owner as well, you hire in an amateur way, bringing in help to hire. I mean, I know recruitment agencies have a bad rep at times, but when you get to a certain size, it doesn't have to be a full-blown agency. It just means speaking to another business owner. How do you hire? What's your process like? Making sure that you're selective as soon as anyone came in that I got even a slightly good relationship with and thought, this guy is normal. That was my barometer. Are you normal enough to work in our business? And I mean, you need to have much higher standards if you want to actually get to where you want to get to. If you've got ambitious goals, and there will always be the right person, even if they come in later on in maybe a few weeks' time. Don't panic hire. And I think letting the business get to a stage where we were panic hiring because we were so busy, probably a mistake on my behalf as the business owner, waiting to almost the most comfortable part of the journey to say, we have the money now because we've grown, we need this person in because we're so busy, therefore we'll hire. And then you'll make a bad hire because you're too stressed out trying to juggle. So yeah, setting up and planning to scale. I think don't do it the opposite. And I know that's a privileged thing to say, and you need funds to do so, but at least having the strategy in place to know how the growth is going to occur.
And what's the most difficult thing about your business right now? So in terms of the operation, and what's your sort of greatest struggle?
Yeah, I mean, probably housekeeping as a general department. It's really tough to keep hold of good housekeepers. Housekeepers in general is quite a transient job. The best housekeepers tend to moving on to completely different industries. Also, it's relatively low paid, and as much as we try to be competitive with what we pay, we're limited in what clients will pay as a cleaning fee and in what guests will pay as a cleaning fee. So we have to be responsible with how we manage that. And we have a really good core group of housekeepers who've been with us for a few years, who will we can call upon in an emergency will, bail us out in those instances. But then we also have a fringe group that are quite transient, that come and go. And I think that's most businesses are like that. And as we've brought in external managers who've worked in hotels, they've said similar. That's just the nature of the industry. But you'd really love to have we've got 30 housekeepers now. I'd love to have 30 housekeepers who've been with us a year plus, who are fully bought into what we do. And
so that's all internal housekeepers. You don't use any external companies for your housekeeping?
No, we did do, but we encountered the problem where we were at the time growing faster than they could grow, and the standards were slipping because they were not focusing on the recruitment side of things, and they were stretching the staff too much. And I think we needed to retain control. So and one of the benefits of that is that housekeepers are not only motivated by pay, they want to feel like they're appreciated.
That's it.
A lot of cleaning agencies, talking quite generally, are run by cleaners who are cleaning as well, and for them to be focusing on team one-to-ones and well-being and making sure they're being looked after from a welfare point of view is not always high on the priority list, and neither should it be when you're trying to make ends meet, trying to start a cleaning startup. So we brought that in-house and have an internal housekeeping manager, and we do a lot of things outside of the typical pay. So we'll do a lot of housekeeper socials. We've got to take them bowling and things like that. We do a housekeeper night out. We'll do a quiz, and they've got a really good group now where they're good friends. And I think having friends at work is so important, especially as a housekeeper, where you're sent off to a separate apartment to be on your own, and you're given a checklist and you're given 3 properties to do in a day and then go home. It can be quite lonely. And I think having a community and togetherness in that department is so important if you're trying to scale and grow, as without it, your turnover just increases.
No, I couldn't agree more on that point. Another thing that a lot of people talk about at the moment is about the strategy to get direct bookings. Anyone hosting on Airbnb knows that the commission that is paid to Airbnb is significant amount. Almost as much as you would pay to a management company. And whereas it's not a necessity to just use Airbnb to get bookings, because there is this option to get people to come through directly. So do you get many of your bookings directly, and how do you, and if so, how do you go about getting those bookings?
Yeah, sure. And I'd say for us, I'm probably less proud of our direct booking percentage. I think we could do more to increase that. We're probably about 10% now. It could be more, but we haven't invested properly in that area, because I've always been of the idea that if you're going to limp into that world, you're pretty much pushing money down the drain. You've got to go in properly to properly advertise, properly get your click-through rates higher, your SEO basis higher. You've got to make sure you're not just slinging a few quid at Google AdWords and expecting to knock Booking.com off the perch or Airbnb. So for us, we use a bit more of an organic approach rather than the financial side of things. So I think having a brand that you're proud of, but not pushing it too much. So we name all of our properties with the first name is us, then it's the name of the property. And I think that at least brings some cohesion, that if guests are scrolling through Airbnb or Booking.com, they can start to link, that's the same guys as them. And even just size can be a little bit of, it can be trust enhancing. If you can say, there's 10 properties run by the same guys, they must be a decent outfit as long as the reviews are good, etc. And I think the title is something that a lot of people fail to utilize properly. We also use an infographic on our listing, so as well as the property photos, it has something about booking direct. And we actually use it's a little tip that we can share. Do you know the letterboards that you sometimes see them in bars where they put the coffee, and they're quite hipster now, and people put them in properties and you'll have like a nice welcome to Liverpool sign or something like that. We put book direct at hostapartments.co.uk on that, and then that's a picture of that shot by a professional photographer, next to a plant, and it's looking like it merges in with the photos. That's on every single listing in all of our properties.
I saw that last week on your one of your listings, and then I sent it to our manager and I said, "Oh, look at this! That's a great idea."
Yeah, and it's less obvious where you've put it on
Yeah,
PowerPoint and you've put your logo plastered on all the images. You don't want to play the game where you end up like the pound shop with 99p everywhere and stars.
yeah,
Like it needs to be subtle. It needs to feel nice. It needs to feel like it's not in your face. And I think for people who genuinely want to save the money and want to book direct, they'll see that, and that's the crumb that you've left to say,
yeah,
here you
absolutely.
go if you want to do it. And some people will not. They'll prefer the ease of Airbnb and the comfort of dealing with Airbnb directly. That's why I think there's a healthy split between the two. I think if you've got 100% direct bookings, you could have a lower guest base than what you ultimately could have, and your average nighty rate might be lower. Whereas
Yeah,
you need the channels in some way to be pushing some of them over and
yeah,
creating those repeat guests once they stay with you for the first
absolutely.
time. So there's all sorts, and I think again, just not plastering your brand too much. Like we talk about direct bookings and making sure that we do have a brand and that we do leave crumbs and that we have a website that people can come to. But I personally think it's off-putting when you have like logos all over the cushions on the beds and
Mm,
like that's too much. We don't want to feel like we're in an advert. We want to feel like we've stayed in a luxury premium
yeah,
product
yeah,
that we see in the advert elsewhere. You wouldn't stay in a Hilton hotel and have pictures of Hilton all over the curtains and stuff like that. And that's where I feel like sometimes the message can get lost a little bit.
yeah. Makes sense. So I think I've covered most of the juicy stuff there. I mean, is there anything that you know, anything else that you think is important for the purpose of this podcast to share?
No, I think just going back to what I said before, my biggest advice is to just we operate in the hospitality industry, not the property industry. And too easy, it's too easy to get lost in the property industry because your clients that you're dealing with, the estate agents you're dealing with, and the right move sites, you sometimes think you're involved in property. And our service is hospitality. We're looking after the property on behalf of the owner. And you might be the owner, but your stakeholder, you're acting in a different capacity as the owner. When you're delivering the service to the guest, they don't care who owns it, whether it's a landlord, a hedge fund, a big company. They only care what service you deliver. And I think not forgetting that and making sure that we're not just trying to get the guests through the door and out the door again. The next ones, like our vision as a business is to create memorable moments in beautiful spaces, and we push everything through that. If it's not a beautiful space, we don't want to take it on. And we also want to make sure our service creates memorable moments. If we're too big business and we're too corporate and we're right, in you go, out you go, don't ask us many questions, speak to the AI robot if you've got anything, you lose that special magic. And I think trying to remember that your service itself has so much value and that people don't spend enough time looking at touch points of everything that their guest goes through, from, as I said, from the beginning of booking all the way through to the phone call once they've checked in to say, how are you getting on? Is there any questions you've got about the property? You know where we are if you need us. 9 times out of 10, it's no, I'm fine and leave me alone. And sometimes people will be annoyed by it, but for some people, it's the element that you care, that you haven't just give them the key code and said, off you go. It really is thinking about the service as a whole. And I think that's what we're trying to go back to as a business ourselves, less so about growth and portfolio growth and more about quality and service growth. How can we offer a better service to our guests? And that's probably the only way we can remain competitive in the new market where, and I say the new market where competition is rife and fierce. It's not to grow more and contribute more to the issue, and hopefully some of them will go good and some of them will be bad. It's to actually focus on what you offer. And I read a book called Oversubscribed a while back, and it was huge for me. It was all about why those little restaurants that don't do much else in terms of advertising or others have queues out the door, why certain businesses have got so much demand for the next product before they've even released what the product is. And it's about trying to create that special feeling about your business and not trying to be a yes man to everyone. And that was the catalyst for us scaling our business back to be, we are high-end city centre only Liverpool properties for the time being. And it meant that we weeded out a lot of clients who would have contacted us and asked us to manage a property that we were not interested in managing, but also meant that when someone read that on our website and they actually were in that category already before they found us, it made them feel like they'd found the right company to work with. And I think that that's a huge thing, to be focused on what you are offering and not trying to be all singing and all dancing to everybody.
So what does the future look like then for Host So Simple?
Yeah, so it's actually a really exciting time for Host So Simple. So I actually haven't even shared this with you offline, but it's really exciting time for us that we were actually acquired about a month ago. So
I actually heard this last week.
Okay.
I was at I told you I was hosting a networking event in Leeds. Someone had turned up a networking event, and you came up in conversation, and they were like, "Oh, they've just been acquired." And I was I was speaking to Joe just a couple of days ago. He didn't mention anything, but no, that's really exciting.
So we haven't actually officially announced the press release yet, but essentially, and for us, it's going back to all the basics about working with people we want to work with. And the company who've acquired us are a much larger business based in the Northeast, Host and Stay, and they're run by a family as well, brother and sister, a dad's in the business, the brother-in-law's in the business, and they when we met with them, they run the same systems as us, Guesty, Price Labs, all these different features, and we're essentially a smaller version of them, and owning the entire timeline from when the client gets involved. So offering the refurbishment and interior design services, offering the sourcing services for finding the property, all the way through to management. So Host and Stay have got their own interior design arm of the business, Styled. They also own a construction business, and even through to solicitors and estate agents now. So for us, I think being brought into the bigger picture of what they're trying to do, and a huge focus on quality, even though they have 900 units now. I think I'd put me grandma and granddad in any of them with pride, and I wouldn't put them in something that I was thinking, oh, I'm a bit embarrassed about that. I'd love to be able to say, as we scale as a larger business, we're not just doing it in quantity, but also quality. And I think quality is, I've mentioned it a few times already on this conversation, really is the future, because the barriers to entry for people launching now have never been so low with technology. And we need to make sure we're professionalizing as an industry. And I think our partnership with Host and Stay will give us a huge competitive advantage in Liverpool, being able to centralize a lot of the functions, such as back of house guest team, finance, HR, marketing, etc., but also to the clients, and the clients being able to find properties further afield and trust that the same process that they're used to in the Northeast or Northwest is being followed all the way from finding the property, designing and refurbishing the property, into the long-term management, and ultimately the review scores that the property gets month in, month out.
Are they the biggest management and kind of overall sort of SA package company in the UK?
Yeah, so I'd say the big guys, Guest Ready, are a lot.
Guest Ready,
so they're worldwide, and they probably got more units, a lot more units in actual fact. But it's slightly different in that we, from the very beginning, that a client wants to get involved in short-term rentals, even from the solicitor conveyancing side now. We can literally hold your hand from conveyancing, finding the property, renovating it, designing it, managing it, and all with the ultimate goal of knowing what this property needs to do and be at to generate the returns. I think one of the downsides of our industry is people being sold fake returns generated from AirDNA and buying and parting ways with a lot of cash before they realize the sad truth that maybe it's been overestimated slightly, shall we say. And I think trust is such a huge thing, and we want to be the best at the overall package, as you say, in the UK.
Yeah, I understand. And is that the fee that you were required for, is that something you can disclose on this podcast, or would you rather
No,
not?
I think I'd have to check for that, but I'd say it's a life-changing amount for me, and I think
that's really good.
For me, I've always wanted to. I love what I do, and I'm passionate about what I do. But at the same time, I see what our clients are doing, and see the side that they enjoy and the lifestyles they enjoy. And for me, being able to invest in my own portfolio was a huge reason about going down this route. And I think I have a huge amount of loyalty with my staff, and a lot of them are really close friends with me. We're at my wedding last year, and to do a typical sellout where we sell and leave, and the whole culture is diluted, was never on the cards. And I think all the team is safe, everyone is staying, all the clients are on the same or better terms, and it genuinely is a win-win-win from their perspective, our perspective, and the clients and the team. So yeah, we're so excited to see what we can achieve in the coming years. But for me personally, it's just a chance to learn a bit more and work with guys who have ultimately done more than I have, and I can see what they do differently to us and how we can emulate that.
Yeah, so many congratulations. That's such good news. So really glad to hear that. Well done.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Right, so yeah, I think we've covered most things there, and that was really insightful. Yeah, and it's really just, as I say, Host So Simple is the first company I ever came across in this space, and so I was really keen to sort of sit down and talk to you today. So yeah, thanks very much. And if somebody wants to reach out, like a landlord, if they have a property in the city centre that they're looking to run as a short-term rental, so how would they reach you?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's worth noting now that as a result of the acquisition, we are now managing further afield. I think the reason for that is that our profit margins are now not quite the same as they were previous. So we now can operate further afield because of how we are set up centrally. So it's not just Liverpool city centre now. We're based all around the northwest. So as far afield as Chester, North Wales, and Preston, and everything like that. So for us, it's the same service you would used to be getting from the Liverpool team, just with different people on the ground doing the housekeeping and maintenance. So for us, it's Host So Simple. So it's www.host-so-simple.com, and we are now part of the wider Host and Stay brand. And yeah, really excited to see what we can do in the coming years with the partnership that we've got and implementing the unique service offering that we have in areas that have not been able to tap into that so far, where maybe it's a bit more disjointed in having to find your own designers, own furniture, your own management company, separate cleaners, etc. Whereas now it's a one-stop shop for everything, in a much better coverage. So yeah, really exciting.